Okay, let me guess what's happening. You're starting to have a little bit more success in jiu-jitsu. You've kind of pushed past that first initial phase as a white belt, and then all of a sudden you get hit with all of these cool techniques that you start seeing either on YouTube or instructionals that come across your desk, or even guys that are influenced inside of your own jiu-jitsu academy. But you have no idea which avenue you should start taking. You don't know if you should go down path A, path B, or path C. Really, you're trying to determine which one is going to make the biggest impact on your jiu-jitsu training immediately. So rest assured, I'm going to try to help you guys out today by giving you two incredibly powerful actions that you can take in your next training session or right after you turn off this video to start becoming more clear about which path you should start training and why. I've been teaching jiu-jitsu students now for 10 plus years, and I've been training jiu-jitsu myself for 13 plus years. So I've experimented over the time with a bunch of different ways to train jiu-jitsu, how to teach jiu-jitsu, and to me, the best way to train jiu-jitsu is this kind of purposeful or mindful or really kind of focused style of training, whatever you want to call it. Especially if you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you guys know I'm a big fan of setting some kind of a training focus. But normally, one of the biggest pushbacks that I get when I start encouraging students to do this is they're like, Chase, I have no idea where I should be starting. I don't even know what I should start doing. I don't even know if it's going to make a big difference. I just like showing up and coming in and just going with the flow and start training. So for example, let's say I'm a brand new blue belt. What should I actually be focusing my training on first? Where should I place large amounts of training attention and focus toward improving? Should I be focusing on escapes first? Should I be trying to improve submissions? There are so many different techniques and path options. I have no idea even where to start, even if I wanted to start becoming more purposeful in my training. So the first thing that we want to break down is this idea between two main types of training. It is really what I call it, or how I break it down for my students. But the first one is what we call short-term training. And short-term training refers to the main focus as basically being your strengths. So I really encourage students to focus on short-term training if they're getting ready for some type of competition, because what short-term training needs to be built around, or the mentality you need to have to become good at short-term training, is you need to determine what your strengths are, build a game plan around it, and then start to improve your strengths. And that's very important to do in a competition setting. In the beginning of your career, if you're first time competing, you will a lot of times not have any kind of a game plan, and it takes a little bit of time of competing in order to feel comfortable executing a game plan. But if you have any desire of becoming like a high level competition jiu-jitsu practitioner, you need to eventually find what you're good at or develop some kind of game plan. And then when you go out there and compete, you try to execute your game plan as best as you can. And then if it goes awry, then you might have to make the adjustments on the fly if you need to. But regardless, the short-term training plan, the base focus is about what you're strong in. Long-term factor is really built around this idea of working on what I would call your needs, or the things that you most need to improve. So basically the things that you're not very good at. So for example, let's say I'm a white belt and I know I'm always getting stuck in the bottom of side control, whether I'm in a tournament or I'm training in live. That's a pretty good idea that I might need to be focusing a large amount of my attention of getting out of side control. So really the main difference between short-term and long-term training is the mentality, or what the training is going to be built around. Now, that term need to be training is a little bit tricky, because if I'm in competition and I'm wanting to compete a lot, I need to be training my strengths. So I don't want to get that confused. When I talk about the long-term training, my needs are the things that I know I need to improve. So the things that I wouldn't even put into my short-term training plan or my competition training plan, because it wouldn't make any sense. It's the stuff I'm not very good at. Why would I put the stuff that I'm not good at in something that I'm trying to impose my will and dominate and win with? So basically, the biggest difference is the mentality of the type of training that you want to employ. Now, the great thing is that the 2 actions that I'm going to share with what you guys can do today, as soon as you turn off this video, works for both the short-term and the long-term training. So this is the first action that I recommend everyone start with, because it doesn't matter what type of skill you are. You don't even need a training partner to be able to do it. In fact, you can do it right after this video is over. This is what I call a jiu-jitsu audit. So what you want to do is you want to grab either a piece of paper, put it down next to you, or open up your phone. And I want you guys to start typing out a list of the different techniques that you know from these common positions. The main positions that I recommend students start with are the most obvious: the mount, the back mount, side control, standing, just these basic positions that we are all introduced to, and start listing out the different techniques from these positions. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of time filling out this library. You don't need to write out every single technique, because if you're a white belt, that technique library might be kind of small, but then if you're a purple belt, that library might be very large. But usually what happens is what comes to the surface is the stuff that you feel is the most pressing in your brain. So it's either going to be a combination of stuff that you are doing really well, or it's even going to be a combination of things that you know that need to be improved. After you have a sufficient list, I recommend about 15 to 30 techniques total. So that's it. But try to make it diverse. Don't make it just about one position only. Try to get a list of multiple techniques from multiple positions. That way you have a good starting place. The next thing is, next to those techniques, I want you guys to list either whether it's a win or a loss. So a win would be something that you feel like you do well. It's some technique that you usually catch a lot in training, or a position, or something that you feel very confident in doing. So for example, I know that whenever I get to the mount, I have a lot of success catching X chokes. So I might put that as a win. A loss might be something that whenever you maybe try the elbow escape from the bottom of the mount position, you don't do very well. It never seems like it works for you, and that's been sticking out in your mind. So you would want to put that as a loss. So it's very important that you list out what is a win and what is a loss, because in action 2, we're actually going to validate if you're correct. What this also usually highlights is it usually gives students an idea of getting the techniques out of their brain and onto paper. I'm a big fan of being able to overlook everything as a whole, then start to narrow it down. A lot of times students get so confused, or they get this paralysis by analysis idea, because they have all this information stored up there, but they don't know which thing they need to pull down and start to focus on first. And so doing this exercise and getting something out either onto paper or on your phone lets you kind of see a bird's eye view, and it can help you narrow down about which path that you want to start training. So hopefully you guys like this information. If you're liking it right now, make sure you leave me a comment and a like down below. It really does help me kind of in the YouTube algorithm. It helps me get shared to other people who maybe don't know me, never seen my information, and to help them start making their training just a little bit better. So what is the second action that I recommend? Well, this one might take a little bit more time, but you can do it in your next training session. So what I recommend is now something called a rolling audit. And so what that means is basically the next time that you train, I want you to pick a certain position or a certain type of a focus and do nothing but try to experience what happens in that position. So usually I recommend, if you're going to be a white or a blue belt, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be in the bottom position. Instead of trying to forcefully get your way out, I want you to experience and see what happens to you. See if you get caught in certain things. See if you can make certain escapes work. And then you can even do that with trying to gain top position, and you can even do it with attacking position. And what this does is it makes kind of reality become real. So let me give you guys a quick example of why I know this works. Because often amount of times whenever I work with students, especially if I'm working with you one-on-one and I have my hands on you and I just know your general belt rank and we're wanting to train, a lot of times I'll ask students very basic questions about, well, how is your mount escape, or how is your side mount escape, or how are these things? And the often responses that I get is, oh no, I know all those techniques and I know them really well. And I think students do that because they don't want to be embarrassed that they don't know the fundamentals. And honestly, it's kind of boring. You know, that's the first thing that you guys learn. So whenever you start becoming a blue belt or you start becoming more skilled, you want to deviate away from what is quote unquote the basics, right? So they will put down on their paper that their elbow escapes are successes or that they're a win and they feel very strong with. But then once I make them do this kind of rolling audit where they have to test it and they see it, a lot of times even less skilled individuals, it's very challenging for them to be able to hit their elbow escapes or their techniques that they said were a win. So we need to have quality data here, or we need to have a real volition behind what we should be training. It's not good enough just to sit down and list the techniques and put if it's a win or if it's a loss. And it's not good enough just to do the rolling either, because a lot of times if you do the audit first where you write down, those things are already kind of up in the surface of your brain. They're fresh on your mind. So then you can start to cross-check them in your actual rolling. If you just do the rolling, a lot of times what happens is you start missing things because things are happening so fast and rolling. There's so much chaos happening. Your brain hasn't attached to a specific thing that it wants to focus on. But if I put that I feel strong with escaping with an elbow escape, and then I go and try it and rolling and I see what happens to me and it doesn't work, then that becomes a very powerful presence of mind thing in my brain that I know I might need to work on. So regardless of which one you're ever wanting to do, whether it's the short term or the long term, both of these exercises or both of these training ideas will really help you become clear. Because if you can really start to pinpoint what is successful, not what you just write down on paper that is successful, but what you can actually correlate and validate inside of your training session, you have a great start to determining your short-term training plan. Now you can take those strengths and you can start to build a game plan around those strengths for your next competition. And then if you're wanting to work on your improvements or your needs, then now you really have a quality list of evidence to point which areas you need to start improving, whether that was written out on paper or you experienced it in real training. Now, I know that still doesn't give you 100% a clear picture because you could have so many strengths and you could have so many weaknesses. Now you're like, well, Chase, which one do I need to focus in on first? And I actually have a whole way that I teach that, but that's way more. There's a lot more to it. Now, there's general ideas. Like if you're a white belt, there's probably a pretty good chance that you need to work on bottom. If you're a blue belt, there's a good chance you need to work on bottom. If you're a purple belt, there's a good chance you need to be starting to be on top, and brown belt and so on and so forth. But to be super pinpoint specific about which techniques you should be training and why that is, honestly, is unique to you as an individual. And the way that I know this is because at the academy that I teach at, we have a blue belt curriculum test. So basically, no one can get a blue belt at the academy I teach out of unless they all demonstrate the same amount of techniques. And we know that there's a certain level of proficiency they have to have before they can get their blue belt. I've had 2 students go through it the exact same amount of time, basically do the exact same amount of classes. And even though they've learned the same information, some students are stronger in the guard and some students are stronger in the mount, or some students are stronger offensively and some are stronger defensively. And these are students that learn the exact same information, relatively same size, relatively same weight. So that shows you that humans aren't perfect. So this is why I really encourage students to develop some kind of a training system or a process and take a little bit deeper dive into owning their own training. Because if you don't, and you just expect your coach to hold your hand and tell you exactly what you need to be training, then it's going to be very tough, because the reality is it's different per person. Brand new and you started coming to jiu-jitsu, you knew absolutely zero. So you literally needed someone to hold your hand in order to get you kind of caught up to speed. But the reality of jiu-jitsu is as you actually progress more, the student should detach from the instructor a little bit more and start to take more ownership. Now, I'm not saying you go open up your own school or you're quality enough. Whenever you're enrolling or you're in training or you're wanting to develop a competition plan, you should be putting in the work and figuring out what you should be doing, and then using your coach as a resource to bounce ideas or suggestions off of. So if you come up with some type of short-term training plan and you bounce it off your coach, and your coach is like, man, that looks great. Yeah, continue to do that. And you're like, okay, great. Or maybe he's like, well, you have this, maybe I've seen you train here, so I recommend this. But if you're just waiting for your coach to tell you exactly what to do, it's gonna be tough because there are so many students, there's so many other variables that it's very challenging. And unless they're standing over you, watching you 100% of the time, and they know everything that you're consuming, it's really unrealistic for you to have that expectation. You need to put more onus on yourself and to start taking more ownership. And you can do that by doing the 2 exercises. Also, if you're interested in free resources, I check out my free acceleration guide down in the bottom. That kind of goes into a little bit more detail about this jiu-jitsu kind of data or funnel or audit kind of concept. Also, this is what I do on a daily basis. I help students either online or in person get better at jiu-jitsu. So if you're wanting my help and if you're wanting my guidance to actually kind of tell you exactly what to do, because I'm going to have you do all these things I just shared with you guys today, but then work together as like a partnership to push you in the right direction, I have a coaching program where I help students do that. And that's the best way I can offer a service virtually versus putting my hands on you. But it's going to require people who actually want to put in the work. So if you're into that stuff and you like that stuff, you can fill out your application down below here. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.